So let me welcome everybody to the Expeditionary Capabilities and Requirements Deep Dive. Now, I don't know how deep you can dive in 1 hour, but I know that I'm the only thing keeping you from, some Class 6 activity, so we'll try to do this fast. I'm not going to do a lot of the talking once I'm done with the format here, which is pretty simple. Our purpose is, I think, to understand what the challenges we have as an Army, Army aviation in particular, in an expeditionary type scenario. And those would include anything from maritime operations, forced entry, immature theater operations, expeditionary requirements and gaps and DOPLM, training knowledge gaps, aviation future networks, integration, or any of other host of issues. And we've got Ellis Goldson here, a DCD from the CDID from Fort Rucker. We've got our SOAR community here, General Hutmacher, and many of his folks who certainly have a lot to say about expeditionary. We have the prior 36 Cav commander here, 4 years, you said, on command, which included a Kuwait rotation. And I think you had not a pickup team, but you had a task force that came from a lot of what were not traditionally associated with your brigade. And I know in the audience here we have lots of people with expeditionary experience and knowledge here. So let's begin the discussion. And the only rules are that we stay kind of on the focus of the topic here, and there's more than enough to talk about. And it can be anywhere on those subjects or anything related to that, and it can include all the DOPLM factors in expeditionary. So who would like to start the discussion here today? John, since you're the director of aviation for G35, and I'm sure you're spending late nights thinking about these things, what are the biggest challenges you see right now? And I think we can fall back on Mike Lindsay, General Lindsay's comments this morning, which he laid out quite a roadmap of where we need to go forward. And I think a lot of those have expeditionary implications. Anything you'd like to start with?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Wasn't really planning on addressing the group like this, but I think it probably is a good idea to frame our discussion or frame the way we think about going ahead with maritime expeditionary operations. And I think about just in the span of my time in uniform, 30 years or so, we've really transformed the Army from what it was to what it is right now. If you think about where we were, I think General Lundy mentioned it this morning, with more soldiers in Europe than at end state in FY19 than we're actually going to have. That's a significant change. So we're going from a world where we were predominantly a forward-based Army and engaged on the ground to this significant retraction that has taken place. Precipitated by the end of the Cold War in 1989, and then we went through a series of small wars through this drawdown, and then we started getting into, I think before 9/11, we started getting into the idea of being a smaller force that was more flexible and agile and expeditionary, and then we went to Iraq and Afghanistan, and so that kind of let some of our skills, our expeditionary skills, atrophy that we will probably now have to regrow, and that's where we are right now, dealing with those questions. So, what does that mean from a Pentagon perspective? I look at it in terms of what we are going to be able to do. So I think one of the roles I can play in this group here is serve as the conscience of folks who may come to the table with a lot of ideas about what we can do next. And the fact of the matter is, I think we've got to make choices, and we've got to make some choices about what we want expeditionary capability to be, what we want it to be in every unit, and what we need in selected areas. And so that's something that I think we think about at the headquarters on a regular basis. And what comes to mind, of course, is maritime operations. What does it mean to have a maritime capability in the U.S. Army and U.S. Army aviation? And we would prefer to have a very deliberate approach to getting after that question. And I know some of the folks in the 160th probably have some ideas about what it takes, but we've got to make sure we're solid on our assumptions when we're talking about the costs associated with maritime operations, because it's no small proposition in terms of time, investment, dollars, training, et cetera. So, sir, you have any comments on that?
Well, okay. I think that people tend with maritime operations to just think about deck landing qualifications. That's generally what people think about. And in my mind, and I've got CW5 Bob Witzler here, who's got certainly more bounces on a deck than I do. But I think that's the easy part. That's very easy. I mean, landing on a deck of a ship can be challenging, and depending on the sea state and things like that, but it's not more challenging than going into a blacked out HLZ under fire, that's for sure. I think you've got to take we have to take as an Army, especially with regards to regionally aligned force, a more holistic attitude towards this. So it's almost, for the Army folks in here, it's almost a dot mil PF approach to this. So there's a training aspect, maintaining currency, limited decks, and all those kind of things. We have gotten to the point now where our simulation is the Navy recognizes that as meeting the requirements for at least some of our deck qualifications, which could help the conventional forces as well. But there's a maintenance aspect to it. Maintenance is more difficult on a ship. C4I, so comms are more difficult. You would think that there's plenty of bandwidth on a ship. There is, but it's all taken up. So you have to have your own comms package that operates independently on a ship. There's corrosion aspects to it, so we do engine washes, flushes every single day after we're done flying, sometimes twice a day. We spent, I believe, about 3 years or 4 years total operating off of barges in the Persian Gulf in the mid-'80s, and I did a few tours over there. So the engine washes, those kind of things take care of the engines, but there's also corrosion over the long term, which happens on the cannon plugs and all the other kind of things that were just basically disintegrating. We had 460s that we rotated over there continuously. So that was a lesson learned for us. The other thing is, I did my one of my last deployments as the first of the 160th Commander was aboard the Truman, a carrier off the coast of Virginia. And I remember watching, we landed, tied down our aircraft and all that, chained them to the deck, and I watched all my crews going through the hatch, and I kept thinking when they walked through the hatch, I may never see these people again. Because, once they go into the ship, it's hard to communicate with them. They're spread out all over. If there's changes to the mission, trying to rally the force and all that is extremely difficult. So we have we have techniques, tactics, and procedures to do all that because we've learned a lot of lessons. We obviously operate off of maritime platforms routinely. I would suggest as we go forward beyond this that we establish some sort of working group to capture this, because I know General Odierno's intent with the regionally aligned force and all that is to go this way. And it's different qualifications. Landing on a big ship, for instance, an 8-spotter or a carrier, than it is landing on a 2-spot or a single spot, and it presents different challenges with those different vessels. So, I guess my overall message here is that it really is a lot more than just landing on a ship, unless you're going to spend one or two nights there, execute, and get off. There is a whole other aspect to it. The last thing I'll say, and it's with command and control, is if you're on a bunch of small ships, you end up subdividing your units. So, we deploy, a company takes pieces out of the battalion to deploy a company somewhere. Well, we ended up deploying 2 or 3 little birds somewhere. So you start quickly running out of tool sets, you start running out of comms, you start running out of all those low density items, avionics types, all those kind of people. So, if we if we go down this road, you got to look to task organize and come up with some deployment packages that come out from that. So I hope that's helpful.
That's great, Clay. Thanks. Well, we have a National Guard Brigade commander who just came out of 4 years of command and a deployment to Kuwait. So maybe you can give us a little bit of the National Guard flavor, the challenges you have as it relates to possible expeditionary.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I would say that on the conventional side, one of our challenges was to actually get the deck landing qualifications done. It became easier once we had the mission and we had some priority, but we didn't get any shipboard type operations till we got to Kuwait, and we were able to coordinate with Fifth Fleet to get a boat that was within range and schedule time on that. The other parts that we considered was the maintenance aspect. The longest embark that we had was a week. And during that time, considerations came up of, well, what if we need to do an engine change out here, or a rotor blade delaminates? Getting something that large out to the boats where we would have needed to figure that out. So those were a lot of things that we considered. Definitely the corrosion control didn't get to be to a point that we couldn't manage over the course of a week. Daily engine flushes and rinses once they landed. So that worked out well. There was the other pieces that we had getting up and off the boat a little bit here was if we're going to be bridging the gap of how much combat power we have, and we're going to bridge this with technology, the interoperability between our systems, such as the manned-unmanned teaming aspect of things, working with Predators. We worked with Raptors, F-15s, Global Hawk, various other platforms, and these guys are running Link 16. We didn't have that in our Block 2 longbows, so I had to come up with workarounds for those sort of items. We were getting some really good traction as we left with the Fifth Fleet guys out of Bahrain on being able to push real-time video. What they liked about having the Apaches on board was the capabilities that it brought in that 5-mile ring around the ships, because they've got quite a bit of their own firepower and protective systems to work within that field. But just beyond that zone, their fast movers can't really prosecute targets the way a couple Apaches could go out. And they could also push the video back to the ship as long as we brought our systems that could receive it. So the Navy was getting interested in potentially having those sort of systems, OSVRT, that sort of thing, on the boats to be able to get that sort of a downlink from us. So I think that interoperability of some of our technology needs to move a little bit forward as well to be more effective in a littoral operation.
Thank you. Well, you've spoken to some of the joint part. Another part of the joint part, my experience on the Army early on was in the infantry and then later in aviation, was everywhere I went, and I was in light forces and then cavalry, the Air Force got us there. So it was C-130s, it was C-141s, it was C-5s, and now, of course, C-17s. So it seems to me that if we're talking about an expeditionary, you're going to go right into the fight or very soon after. And so there's a difference from the type of scenarios that we've been dealing with these mature theaters or that develop into mature theaters. Is there anybody that can talk to that piece at all or would like to address that? Okay, well, we'll get with that conversation as we go through this. You want to talk to that? Sure.
Real quick on that. I think as we're divesting our Kiowa Warriors and we're turning to Apaches for that role, we're going to have to think about the capacity on those aircraft you just mentioned, how many aircraft we can fit in there.
Right.
How much of the...
Well, one of them's in a museum now, so that took care of itself, but your point's made. Yeah,
so that piece
absolutely.
Too. We can't put quite as many airframes into a non-mature location as we could right now.
Yeah, and to General Hutmacher's point about kit sets and modular, the footprint, when you go in, you got to go in with the logistics that you need for whatever time period you think you're going to have to operate. So another issue. We have some international audience here, and I think that's great because while we've talked about the jointness already, and there's more to talk about that certainly, it seems to me that anything we do from here on, as it's been the last decades, is going to involve coalition partners. Do any of our partner nations here today have any comments about challenges that your nations face, or together with American coalitions? Yes, sir. Pass that down if you would. Thank you.
Major Charles Mangler. I'm at Fort Rucker. I'm the Canadian LO. Just bring two topics, the Afghanistan and Haiti. First thing, real estate is always a challenge, and logistics is the second challenge. Canada deployed a composite air wing, so a mix of Hercs, Griffin helicopters, Chinooks, UAVs, contracted helicopters, and our first challenge was ramp space. The U.S. Air Force, U.S. Army, UAE, other countries were all around Kandahar, and we're all building, and who has the biggest real estate and who can have what and everything. That was the biggest challenge, just getting in the aircraft park, getting in an Antonov, enough space to do a half circle to unload the helicopters or a tank or whatever. And that was one big challenge for us. And the maintenance issue, basically we didn't do the third line maintenance of the helicopters in theater. So we'd have a C-17 come in from Canada with how many Chinooks, or not Chinooks, Griffin helicopters, the Bell 412 militarized. And they would show up with 2 or 4 helicopters, how many they could put in, give it to us, and then after that they'd take whatever we've been using, because basically we were just going through the twin packs too quickly. So our method was third line maintenance back in Canada, and we would rotate all the equipment, but the problem again, it was real estate and getting enough planes in and out to rotate everything. And then the other one was Haiti a few years ago with the earthquake and all the infrastructure being unusable. There was no place to get the helicopters in, so we had to qualify our just a day qual on carriers in a very, very short time. So that was another challenge. So again, real estate is a big, big issue, and then after that, the logistics of getting the big lifters. So my question to the U.S. Army, how's your relationship with U.S. Transcom? And do you try to use more the plane lift or the ship they provide, or contractual stuff? In Canada, we use C-17s. We only have 4. So we always turn around to I can't remember if they're Ukrainian or Russians, but they show up with the Antonovs. And so we're fighting for contracted lift. So that's expensive, and sometimes it's challenging because everybody wants the same thing at the same time. That could be a very
challenging enterprise today, but I think we've done that in the past also.
So how's the relationship with Transcom, U.S. Transcom?
I would say, I don't know. I'll let current day folks talk about that. I would say it's pretty good because that's how the Army travels in so many cases. But please, who else can answer that question? Or yeah.
I don't think it really comes down to a relationship. It's not like we have good days and bad days with Transcom. It's it's a requirement. It's Transcom's requirement to provide the assets to meet our requirements in accordance with our plans, our comp plans. And so, to the extent that they can do that with what they have on hand, they'll do it based on the need. The question really is a question of capacity, and this isn't just for airlift, but it's also for sea lift. And I think one of the concerns that we have is that the assumption we make when it comes to utilizing commercial assets, both air and sea, is that it's predicated on the assumption that we're going to be uncontested. And so, can we assume that that's going to be the case in the future? And that's really where we run into some potential delays in as we deploy various assets. Does that make sense? Okay, cool.
Are there other international partners that would like? Yes, good.
Thank you, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Eric Merck, I'm the French LNO to Fort Rucker. And I will first give you a testimony of what we did over Libya, because you spoke about be sea-based for 8 days, but when we were striking on Libya, it was no friendly forces boot on the ground, and we had to remain 4.5 months at sea on board. And that's a very different experience for Army people, because we are not used to. And the main surprise we had, it was that the number of crew per helicopter was not enough. Because our guys, they were flying and striking by night, but planning, reporting, analyzing by daytime. And in the morning after the strike, all the mechanics, they were working on the helicopter. And it was no time of silence on the board. So in fact, we had, just after the debriefing of the mission in the early morning, to give some pills of NyQuils to our crew members, to order them to sleep for 2 or 3 hours, to wake them. They were very dizzy at this time, so to give them some pills of adrenaline to wake them up, to brief for the mission of the night.
Uppers and downers, yeah.
To back brief in the afternoon, to give them another NyQuil, because 4 hours before the mission, you are a little bit nervous to be able to sleep normally. So we have to order them another time to medic them, to drug them, another time to make them sleep 3 or 4 hours before the mission, and another adrenaline before the takeoff for the mission. And when you are playing this game for 40 nights of mission in 2 months, you are aware after 1 month that your guys, they are smashed. Not only the pilots, but all the mechanics. And we had to shift our whole strike group after only 1 month, because they were absolutely destroyed. So that's something that is very different. We were used to remain 8 days on board. That's something we can do very easily with the traditional training of deck landing and living with the Navy. But as soon as you are remaining longer with nobody, no boots on the ground, it's a very different mission. So my question is also for the US Army, how you are dealing with this sort of mission to prepare, and how you will share this sort of mission with the US Marine Corps Aviation if needed to do it for a longer duration.
Excellent points. I think I'd like to see if maybe the SOAR or somebody else might want to talk to how you do, because you probably have similar circumstances where you have a small package go in, but you got to stay for a while. Might address that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, first of all, we have absolutely seen similar circumstances. And all aviation units have finite resources when it comes to the humans operating the machines or repairing the machines. So early on, we realized that the flying hours per month had to be very closely monitored. And we set limits. We never set a limit that could not have been adjusted at the right level to accept greater risk if the payoff was high for a particular target. But we were pretty strict about those limits, and not just monthly flying hour limitations, but daily work hour limitations for our crews. Regarding the daily battle rhythm, the way that we handled that is we certainly had the main shift of our battle rhythm was at night. And so the preponderance of our staff force, our planning force, and our air crews, their duty cycle was over the 14 hours of darkness, centered on that. We, for the off cycle, had a sufficiently robust crew left in the Tactical Operations Center so that they could continue to develop intelligence and missions for the following day to ensure that when the crews got up, they were ready to go. The other thing that is just as important is what we did to reduce the required time for our planning cycle. To contrast, when I came to the 160th in 1991, we advertised to our customers that you give us a mission, give us the warning order, and give us 72 hours for a very deliberate planning cycle and levels of rehearsal at whatever we were capable of doing, a rehearsal, and then we would execute the mission. We were still operating with paper maps and lead pencils and doing our calculations largely by hand at that point. Contrast that with today in Afghanistan, where we have very robust mission planning electronic capability, which allows us to take those tasks that were very labor intensive and very important to be checked for fidelity, because one numerical transposition could mean the difference between success and failure, to now that occurs essentially in an automated process. And now it is routine for us at times, if it's been 45 minutes from the time that you've received the mission until it's time to go out the door, you're wondering, geez, when are we going to get out of here? So that, the ability to plan on a much shorter timeline certainly preserves your aircrew's endurance level. As we did that, the equipment really, humans are more important than hardware, and the training that makes them proficient at that is the most important thing. But when we went to Baghdad in 2003, we had printers, for example, that were great unless you spilled your coffee on it or unless it was raining and the map was useless. So you might as well just create a paper map. And we went out to industry and said, hey, we need to fix this. And now I've got one that it doesn't matter. I can literally plan a route that would have taken me 24 hours previously, and I can do it in 9 minutes, including printing the map, and have a very robust product to go out and execute that mission. That, too, preserves the capability of your crews, gives them more time in the execution cycle instead of the planning and preparation cycle.
And does that lend itself to an expeditionary type scenario?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We developed all of that with in mind. I'm admitting publicly that we do tie ourselves somewhat to technology with that, because we're slave to a 110 outlet or a generator and a big darn printer. But all of that equipment has got a tough box that it comes in with rollers and a spot on a pallet that goes right on the C-17, so that we train like we fight. Truly, the equipment that the pilots are issued is exactly the equipment that they deploy with when they go to Afghanistan. It's not something that they're falling in on or that they're having to learn once they get there. It's literally their work machine that they operate with every day.
Excellent.
I'd like to add, one of the things that I think in an expeditionary scenario that has been a game changer for aviation has been the digital map in the cockpit. That increases the pilot's situational awareness going into unfamiliar terrain. You frequently, before we would, what I call, outrun our NVGs. We'd start outrunning our goggles, and it was pretty dicey in a zero illume. An example is, early in the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq, depending on, where you're at in Iraq, if you're out west towards Al-Assad or beyond, out to Al-Qaim, they wouldn't fly in the red illume conditions, and for a very good reason. If you now look at how the cabs are employing themselves, or how they're employed now, and what they're doing on the low illume cycles with the F model and the Mike model with the digital map that's in there, the red illume cycle has become a non-issue, and it's because of that situational awareness that you gain, with that digital map. And the other piece of that is, I think you're able to do a mission change en route easier when you have that technology right in front of you instead of boiler gauges, which is what really most of us grew up with. So having that technology now, so if you've got a fleeting target or a change in a situation en route, you can go on you can do a mission change en route and respond to a change in a tactical situation frequently. I think you get that from that technology in a cockpit. And I'm a guy that, you know, believed, hey, if it's not hardwired in your center console or on the day, I mean, I didn't like it if I had to go down different menu pages. Now, integration is not, it's not free either. I mean, there's, you know, software drops and complications with integrating. So, I see a mix of federated systems and integrated systems as the best solution. But for expeditionary and unfamiliar terrain, having that situational awareness in the cockpit, I think, has greatly enhanced our capability across all of Army aviation.
Great. I think one of the things we haven't touched on yet, and we certainly could address, is the training challenges, and General Lundy touched on that a little bit. Ellis, what at Fort Rucker now are challenges and issues that address the topic that we're talking about right now? Is there anything to talk about there that for the group?
I don't know so much about the institutional training piece. You know, getting a guy through IERW, basic qualification as mission design series.
Right.
Enlisted soldiers that are able to maintain a particular platform, 15 Quebecs, et cetera. That's pretty much going to still be the same. I think what the issue we're going to have is, just like the Chief said, by 2025 have a force that is more expeditionary, leaner, cut a BCT down, but still have the same capability.
Right. As you see transition to the Lakota, and to Mike Lundy's points this morning about getting more to war fighting in the course of the schoolhouse itself, you see that possible in the years ahead as you move to that?
Well, through the simulation system, Jester, the end of course exercise that we put everybody through now, we have the capability to put them in a maritime environment, to put them in an access denial, et cetera. The biggest thing, though, is in our PME. We haven't had to go in, and as John was alluding to, we haven't had to go into an area and live in tents or less, throwing the shelter half over the KW tail boom,
right.
et cetera. We haven't had to do that for a long time. If you go into a captain's career course right now and ask them, how many of you have ever moved a TOC? None of them have.
Yeah. What's a TOC?
If you go in, and the same thing with the NCO PD,
Yeah.
you ask the NCOs, you may get one or two guys to raise their hand, and you say, okay, what were you the last time you did it? And they say, well, I was a PFC. It's a little bit different to be the guy holding the pole for the center of the tent than it is to be the guy that's leading the quartering party in somewhere.
Right.
So I think that's our biggest challenge from an institutional standpoint, is bringing that back in, that thought process. Working with our operations centers, talking about the planning piece, our operations centers, we don't have enough trucks in a headquarters company now to move a TOC in one lift.
Right.
Because we've let the TOC get so big. So some of those kinds of things, how to set it up, how to tear it down, what's really important, what's nice to have,
Right.
et cetera, I think is where we got to go with our doctrine. Make sure we continue to emphasize that. Train people how to train. I talked to Mac McCurry before he went up, started taking command. He was thinking about having a training exercise without aircraft. Just go out and start moving the TOC to get guys back into it.
Yeah.
So some of those kinds of things we might have to look at.
Great. Do any of our ally coalition partners here today have any discussion on the training points, or that they'd like to talk, especially as they relate to coalition operations? If not, Warren, go ahead, sir.
Sir, Charlie Barton, Australian LNO at Rucker. It's more of a question, and I want to try and bring it a little bit higher level. If you could just indulge me for a second. Australia is expeditionary by nature, but we've never really been amphibious, and that's all about to change for us with a 200-metre, 44,000-tonne ship sitting in Botany Bay right now. So we're about to transition with that. At the same time, we've always trained with PACOM in particular with the US Marines, but always fought with CENTCOM, particularly in the AORs that we've been for the last 10 to 20 years.
Right.
So my question is more, conceivably we can be expected to start off with a MEF and a MU and then transition into a CAB. And so my question at the strategic level is, how is the relationship that you're having with Marines, and how is that being defined?
Okay. Well, I don't think I'm the best one to answer that because I'm a little dated, but is there anybody in the audience here that wants to take that on?
You know, I think that we approach aviation in a similar fashion, i.e. we're focused on a ground force. The Marines certainly, you know, they have a very, you know, they're air wings, so they have an air wing and they have a division, and that air wing is dedicated to supporting that division. But I think that's about where the commonality for us ends, right there, frankly. I mean, they routinely do shipboard operations, their force structure, the way they deploy, they have a very set pattern with a part of a Marine Expeditionary unit and all that. So we don't routinely train with them just because of their forward presence requirements. You know, puts them on a pretty strict. It's almost like our R4 Gen.
Right.
I mean, similar to our R4 Gen process. So we don't do a lot of joint training with the Marines at all. And they also run on a different system than we run on. They have a NATOP system, which is their standard. You know, we call it standardization and all those kinds of, but they run on a different philosophy than we do. I think the other thing is because they have, you know, Hornets, F-18s, and as part of their force, and they're really one big air wing, there's a different flavor and a different focus. I mean, they don't believe in cavalry kind of scout operations. I mean, they're Cobras. I mean, they can certainly do that. I'm not saying they can't do that, but they're more focused on attack than they don't employ aviation the way we do. So we don't really have and we don't have a bad relationship with them. I think we just, you know, we just have different focuses. You know, in the Army, you know, we don't have aerial divisions. You don't have an air wing equivalent with a 2-star aviation general in charge of it. You know, we are, you know, really our building block is the CAB in a division, which is an 06 commander working for a 2-star ground force command. And I think that's good for us. I think it keeps us focused and on point with what we need to do. But the Marines, they look at it, you know, very differently. And I actually spent the first 6 years of my career in the Marine Corps, so I can speak with some authority. So it is very much a different philosophy than we approach aviation with. But in the SOF world, we have an ongoing exchange. We have a Marine that's been flying with us for, I don't know, 20, 25 years. We've had an ongoing exchange with them, and then we provide an exchange officer to their fighter weapons school equivalent, WTI, out in Yuma, and we've been maintaining that for about the same amount of time. So I think there is something to learn, but the problem is outside of those institutions like WTI or something like that, it's just hard, I think, on the training calendar for us to break away from the requirements that we have internal to our own services to train together.
Good.
And sir, maybe as a way ahead, these opportunities could present themselves as we're moving into more of a regionally aligned force. I know during our time in Iraq, we worked alongside Marines in the Ramadi area, but we never synchronized what we were doing. In Kuwait this time, we had 900 Marines come ashore, and Cobras and Hueys, for 30 days, and it gave us a really great opportunity to do JATs with them out at Udari Range and capitalize on as much crosstalk and living together and doing actual missions and planning together as we could. But that was purely opportunity. It hadn't been planned. But those opportunities may come up in the future. They should.
Sir, if I could just make one comment, and that is we talked about working with the Marine Corps recently during one of our most recent public events, and there was an article that came out later in the week about that, and one of the 3 MEF commanders made the statement that he'd never been on a battlefield that was too crowded with allies. So I just want to make that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I never was concerned if I had Marines on my right flank or my left flank. It was a good thing. So I think we just recognize the differences in why we're organized the way we are, and we make sure that when we do have joint operations, we pay attention to those differences as we plan to do operations together, and I think it generally works. You know, one of my concerns as we go forward here, as we bring the Apache force in, we move the cavalry to a new mount. We put them on an Apache. And I think the comments I've heard from 82nd Division Commander about the Global Response Force and the need for aircraft that they can put into small aircraft and get someplace quickly, that there's a concern there. Also concern from other division commanders and from the Maneuver Center of Operations, Maneuver Center of Excellence at Fort Benning, was we can't lose our cavalry instincts, and that is a training and a culture, and some of us think an attitude. And so anybody want to take that on as we go forward and how to work that? Warren, go ahead.
Sir, one thing, the advantage of being a retiree now is I can have my heretical thoughts all to myself. But
remember, we have press here, so.
Yes. But you know, there's been a lot of talk about the challenges of operating off the ship, and unlike some of our friends and allies, we have the advantage of having the United States Navy, having the United States Marine Corps, and they have a day job, and they're out operating off of those boats. And one thing that speaks to these gaps and seams is the potential for shore-based Army aviation. You know, one of the questions when we start talking littoral, the seam between land, air, and sea, is what's in it for the Army? Well, I think it's flank security is an example. When I was operating off the Korean coast, it's that shallow water off the shore that is suitable for hovercraft and not suitable for U.S. Navy warships, as an example. There are several parts of the world where you take the world's best surface combatant, the Arleigh Burke class destroyer. It has 9.3 meters of draft. The 5,000 pax cruise ship you were on only was 8.8. I mean, the thing is great for a hunt for Red October, but it can't go into the shallow waters where the thousands of an unnamed Middle Eastern country would have all their fast inshore attack craft. So if you combine that with their A2AD capabilities, their anti-ship cruise missiles that would keep our Navy, our Marine Corps concerned, and they would have to move around deep out at sea to avoid being targeted by those things. Not only is there all the maintenance challenges, everything else, but when we displace those guys from their day job, when we get on their boat, we're exposed to these very same risks they are. So when we operate from an unsinkable aircraft carrier like Udari, as an example, we may be actually closer to that fight and able to do the cavalry mission of security and reconnaissance right there in the objective area and have a greater persistence and not share any of the vulnerabilities that our friends and allies would have, to include the United States Marine Corps.
Anybody else comments on that?
Hi, I'm Steve Roser, and I'm a retired Air Force flag, but I'm a Fort Rucker grad and flew a lot of helicopters. But when I went out of National War College, when we talk about the Navy, I graduated National War College and went on exchange down to the Atlantic Fleet. And I was there during the Haiti, not the earthquake, but the Haiti incident, and I learned a lot because I was a battle staff director. And I learned about the Navy. And I was there when Admiral Miller made the decision to put the Special Ops Army helicopters on the deck. And I will tell you that was not a unanimous decision, but he had the vote. And I learned a couple of things about the Navy that I thought I'd pass on. First and foremost, they're there to support you, but their number one job is to keep the carrier afloat, period. That's their number one job. And one of the things they don't know, now we have the joint headquarters, but they don't know what the Army Aviation is doing. Now, being a Rucker grad and a helicopter guy in Vietnam and stuff, I was explaining some of the things I thought they were doing. But remember, there's two fleets. There's the Pacific Fleet and the Atlantic Fleet, and they're the train, organize, and equip guys. They push the forces forward, and they push logistics forward. And they would be sitting there in the four-star balcony trying to figure out what the Army wanted to do. So I don't know how it is today, but if I was in an expedition that blew up somewhere fast, I would take that captain that broke his leg and can't go fly, and I'd send him to that headquarters and say, sit up, find the right guy and sit in that meeting. Because they don't, it's not that they're trying to get it wrong, they just don't know. Now, not the problem at the Joint Headquarters, but at the Fleet Headquarters. Not probably at the Fifth Fleet, because they got probably Army guys. But this is back in Norfolk and Hawaii. So I learned that very on. And remember, push comes to shove, the fleet gets protected first and foremost. The rest of my life, I was a mobility guy. Flew C-17, C-5s, 141s. And my advice when we get to expedition, getting out of town is tribal knowledge. We have all kinds of rules and policies and regulations we practice, but when push comes to shove and you got to launch airplanes in the middle of the night and mobilize, if you don't have that NCO Corps that knows the tribal knowledge, you're way behind the power curve. And once you're behind an airlift, it's hard to catch up. And I will tell you, you could sit there and say, I'm golden, because I got Sergeant Joe, he's been doing it for 2, 3 years, he knows everything, but you know what, he PCS'd last week. And he hasn't passed that tribal knowledge down. So the learning curve is a sine curve when you do an expedition. Now, the 82nd, guys like that, they get it, they have it. You get to the Guard and Reserves, they got a tribal knowledge guy there that knows how to do it. It is the easiest thing in the world to get out of Dodge on a Guard and Reserve, and you'd think it might be the opposite. But they get that sergeant that's been doing it for 14 years, man, it just goes like clockwork. So if you got to get in we get in an expeditionary battle, war, you got to, as a commander, you're worrying about a lot of things. I'd make one phone call. Who's in charge of running, getting this thing immobilized and get us out the door? Because I tell you what, it can be backed up 24, 36 hours just because you don't have a guy that he's been to the school and that's all he knows. So just from an aviation mobility, just keep one eye out there and just ask that question in the very beginning. Okay, are we covered on this thing? Because, man, one PCS of one key NCO, and you'd be amazed how slow it gets.
Thanks, Steve. Comments, discussion on that? We're about at the 10-minute mark, and the beer is getting ready to pour here. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the sustainment piece here, because as we go into expeditionary, you know, we're going to go in with a small footprint, or as we talked about earlier, some sort of modular, and we'll have all those challenges. So we got to have a plan. So who wants to talk about maybe some of the sustainment issues here? And I think we all should. Maybe we got Jim Brayman in here who's got some contractor experience. You know, are we still going to have contractors in an expeditionary scenario? Maybe at some point, probably. Anybody want to start that discussion?
I can echo some of the comments made by our coalition partner here that the footprint on the ground is a big deal. We had to beg and scrap for space down in Kandahar Airfield to put in Department of State aircraft, and also up in Bagram, Kabul, out at JBAD, ramp space. It was continually a problem with aircraft on the ground. Became another acronym that was similar to AOG. How many airframes you could actually put there and maneuver and taxi and all that stuff. So it'd be interesting to bring in AMCOM contract people or Transcom contract people, because that's who our contract was with. I don't know how much forward planning they do with the Army when they give you these assets to use that are commercial aircraft in country, and how much planning goes on in advance of where you're going to place them. Yeah. And in essence, it was figure it out when you get there. So,
and that's really where the expeditionary end of this thing is. By the time we get to the contracts piece and everything, it's probably not, hopefully it's not an expeditionary at that point. But those issues are all going to be there at some point,
yeah,
if the operation continues beyond the initial phases.
The cusp of the sustainment piece, bringing in additional support. It's very challenging from a commercial perspective.
Thank you. Buck, you want to talk a little bit about the sustainment business? I know you've done some expeditionary things in your career.
Yes, sir. CW5 Butler, 10th Cab. The bottom line, regular Army for sustainment, any kind of projection that we're going to do out there expeditionary, you really need to get tied in your logisticians, your maintainers with your planning cell. You need to know a rough idea of how long you're going to be on the ground, what your op tempo is going to be, a decent shot at what your footprint looks like, what you think space you're going to have, and then if you don't put logistics first, that expeditionary may be a 24-hour thing until everything's broke, and y'all know that. Bottom line, you got to lead with your fist, which is with your maintainers and your loggies. Second to that, along with that, the best thing I've seen in the Army in the last 10 years at the staff is each brigade staff now has a unit mobility officer. So they are trained to the same standard. So you don't have that problem of that cat leaving in 5 years and not coming back. But you get him in with the S3 folks and the maintenance folks and build your packages support. I mean, we got back in 11. We weren't even done. We haven't even touched reset. We still had birds inducted. We picked up some aircraft, and we got the great alert to get a GSAB out to the East Coast to cover a hurricane. And I thought it was kind of interesting. It's the first time since, I'd say, 03 that we've done something like that, a hurry up and move, and it went pretty well because we kept the same packages that we deployed with. But you got to know what that is and how much space and where you're going. But
and the good thing is you didn't have Class 5 load to take with you on that one.
Roger. But I think we're getting a lot better at really grabbing the loggies and the maintainers and getting them into the planning cells. And I think it's going to be even more important in the future to remember what the fact that, okay, if we're going to do phases, here's what my tail's going to look like on this op.
Yep.
And so I got to plan for it.
Thanks, Bud. Well, I think we're getting to the bewitching hour here. I think I'd like to finish up, and then if there's any last second rounds or final rounds. But to me, I think General Lundy's comments this morning brought it back around to the summary where really, you know, the platforms that we fly and the machinery we use is the best that industry can provide us, and it's really good. But the difference with U.S. forces and our coalition partners is the training, our warfighters, and they make the difference, and how well we work together. So it's our training and all the things that have been talked about today, and that's so the overmatch can't just be equipment, because there's a lot of people with good equipment because we sell it to them, and it's got to be the systems, and the most important system is the warrior, and that's the training piece that develops over time and leadership. And those are the things that all of our nations can, I think, agree on. The most important thing is the readiness and training and leadership of your force, especially when you go into an expeditionary, because you're not going in with a deliberate planning process. You're going in with a lot of unknowns and probably high risk, and so the initiative has to be put forward. And that's where leadership training ahead of time allows you to have leaders that are comfortable in chaos, and they don't wait till they have 100% of the solution before they make a decision. And that's the type of culture that I think we all have to be focused on. Let me offer up any last comments or questions before we close this session out. I see there are none, so I thank you all for your time. And